Bacteria and viruses can be extremely complex. They're some of the smallest creatures we know about, but they are extremely complex. They have machines. How do we rectify that with a good creation? So the title of my talk is Bad Bacteria and Viruses in a Good Creation. But I even want to back up again a little bit to talk about what it means to do science at a Christian institution. We start here with the Bible and the biblical record of history. And there definitely is tension, I think, in the Christian community between when we talk about science and faith. But here we talk about a biblical basis for science. For instance, beauty is something that actually we see in science a lot. And the Bible talks about the lilies of the field and how they're arrayed. That is a connection with science. Also, we talk about other aspects of science that we see in the Bible. For instance, in Romans it says, God made his attributes visible so that, especially his attribute of power, so no one has an excuse. And that's an awesome thing to think about as a scientist, because the Bible gives a basis for observation. The Bible is saying that God made a world that we can observe and see his power. Obviously, that doesn't give us the salvation message, but it points to salvation. But for science, it's a wonderful verse and a wonderful passage because it says that we can know about God, that God made us to observe things, the power in nature that we see in the heavens, in the stars, all the way down to an atomic atom. And so there's nothing more that excites me more than thinking about that biblical basis for what I do in the lecture hall and in the laboratory. So in this talk, Bad Bacteria and Viruses in a Good Creation, where are we going with this? Well, we also deal with another issue that we find in theology and in science, and that is called natural evil. Natural evil is the idea that there are non-man-made events that cause destruction or illness in the human population. We can think of storms. We can think of viruses causing illness. And what do we do with that in the context of a good creation? God created everything good in the beginning, and we believe that. Does that mean some things went bad at the fall? I think so. I think that is a hypothesis that a scientist would like to take. But here's an issue. Here's a problem. Bacteria and viruses can be extremely complex. They're some of the smallest creatures we know about, but they are extremely complex. They have machines. How do we rectify that with a good creation? Many people have actually moved away from God toward atheism because they see the same thing. They see an incredible, intricate creation, but one that includes death, disease, and illness. Susan Jacoby is one of those atheists who talks about how she turned to atheism as a child. And she went to her minister in her church and said, "My friend is dying of polio. He's in a machine helping him to breathe. How do I explain this in relationship to God?" And her minister basically said he didn't have an answer. And she points to her migration to atheism at that point. We see others influenced by that. Steve Jobs went to his pastor as a child and talked about, could he explain war to him and death? And that pastor said he could not totally explain that. Dan Brown, who has made many different movies and written books that are anti-Christian, had a similar experience where his pastor, his minister, could not define for him why there was evil in the world in a good creation. So in this area of bacteria and viruses in microbiology, it's a natural thing to look at this idea. First of all, what we see in bacteria and viruses is complexity. And so we have a rotary motor that we're looking at here in this slide. that's made of many different kinds of parts. It's an actual motor. It is very complex. Some say so complex that evolution cannot account for it. We have secretion machines in bacteria that secrete all sorts of things, even toxins that can actually kill us. So how can we explain these design features that appear to be, could only be explained in that good garden, that initial creation? Because it looks like the physical creation did end on day 6. And so how do we rectify this? Years ago, in dealing with this problem, I decided just to look at some simple numbers of things. So for instance, how many bacterial species cause illness? And when I present this to an audience or to the students in the classroom, the answer is usually thousands, maybe tens of thousands. We can get sick so easily. And the answer is probably a few hundred. And why I say probably is the data is changing. We probably think no more than 400. Probably only 400 bacteria have been documented as causing illness. So then I thought, how many bacterial species are on Earth? So the numbers we're talking about here are species. Scientists, microbiologists predict that there are 10 to 30 million species of bacteria on Earth. And you say, wait a minute. If there's only a few hundred that we know cause disease, and actually we can only grow a few thousand in our laboratories because we don't know how to feed all sorts of different kinds of bacteria, how do we know there's 10 million species? Actually, quite easily. We can take a pinch of dirt from soil, or we can take a milliliter of water. How much is that? Well, if you had a water bottle today and it said 500 milliliters, that's 1/500th of your water bottle. I would say a pinch of water if we could pinch water. And in both those samples, let's say a pinch of water and a milliliter of water from the ocean or a pinch of dirt from our backyard, we can identify millions of bacteria by their DNA. We have probes that can bind to DNA from any bacteria because they all have a similar signature in some parts of that DNA. So when we do that, the prediction goes to 10 to 30 million. Now let's look at the math. If 400 bacteria cause illness, and there's 10 to 30 million species of bacteria, what is that percentage of bacteria that cause illness? Obviously, it's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of 1%. And so that got me thinking years ago, and I wrote a paper about this for a creation society, and I said, there's something going on here. This kind of makes sense in a creation model, that we would predict that most bacteria, because of their complexity, are not causing illness today. And I looked a little to the next question was, what are all these bacteria doing? What are they doing? Now, we could use an argument that could say, maybe there's more bacteria that cause illness because some are at the bottom of the ocean and some are high in the air, and we just don't encounter those every day. That's true. But those at the bottom of the ocean and in the air probably don't live well near us. But we do probably brush up against millions of bacteria every day. Why aren't they causing illness, and what are they doing? When I started looking at this, by and large, bacteria that don't cause illness, and even some that do cause illness, actually are involved in recycling events on Earth. They recycle the nutrients on Earth. I named this idea the biomatrix, or the matrix. And when you look at it closely, because bacteria and even viruses are the most numerous biological organism on Earth, they give evidence of making a biomatrix on Earth that actually supports life. In the next session, I want to talk about some of these bacteria and what they are doing, and we'll pick up there with this concept.